Yeah, easy. Okay. Wow, that's really bright. I'm Lisa. Sarah already told you I went here for undergrad. That was a really long time ago. I haven't been back on campus in 20 years, maybe. So it's awesome to be here. Nothing like a concentration on water existed, like not even remotely. There were just engineers and liberal arts, and I was on South Campus. So Sarah and Sawyer asked me to cover a lot of different things. Each slide could be a whole class. So I'm just gonna dive in. Feel free to interrupt. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to be like, I don't care about that, but I do care about that. And we'll see where we go. But first, could you just like popcorn around the room randomly and tell me, like, give me a sample of what you're all studying / are interested in? Because I understand this is multidisciplinary, right? So I met a few of the engineering PhD students last night, which was super fun. Can like a couple people over here just tell me like your disciplines? I just want to get a sense.
I'm studying biology.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
I'm studying economics and global health.
Okay. Someone over here?
I'm an anthropologist and archaeologist.
Ooh, interesting.
Also anthropological archaeologist and environmental engineering student.
Okay. Give me one more that's like different. Somebody else is studying something different
Global
from
history.
global history. Cool.
Journalism and anthropology.
Ah, cool. Okay, great. So water is like the great merger of all of those things. So if you're interested, I was an English, I was an English-French double major. No, stop that. So a little bit about me. That is what the Lakeville used to look like. It was that was the morning I graduated. That was a really long time ago. Yes, my hair was that long. Those were my roommates. We lived at 614 Clark. And there was a really, really big lawn between Norris and the lake that everybody used to like throw down picnic blankets on and like fall asleep and study. And now there's buildings and trees and I'm confused. After Northwestern, I moved abroad. I lived primarily in France and in Ghana. And then I came back to the States and I bummed around for a little while in Colorado because who doesn't want to do that while you have no idea what you want to do with your life, because it turns out that English and French don't immediately lead to a job. And then I went back to grad school and I wanted a degree in international human rights. I didn't want a degree in international affairs with a concentration in human rights. I felt really strongly that I wanted the piece of paper to say international human rights on it. And at the time, it turned out there were only 2 schools in the country where you could get that piece of paper. And one of them was in Colorado, where I was already living. So I went to grad school at the School of International Affairs, which has changed names 3 times since I was there, at the University of Denver. And my concentration was medical anthropology, which starts to say maybe why Sarah and I get along really well. And so basically what that meant was that I specialized in women's human rights to health, effectively. And that doesn't result in a job in Denver, Colorado. And so now we're gonna go to a civics lesson that's very, very important. Who knows what flag that is?
Washington, D.C.
Woohoo! Who knows why it's a very important civics lesson that everyone understands it? Everyone knows this flag. Because it's not a state, and yet more people live there than the state of Vermont, and we have no representation in Congress. Tell all your friends. Nobody else knows that. Are you from the DMV?
From D.C.
Yeah. Where?
Mount Pleasant and Shepherd Park.
Mount Pleasant. I lived there for 10 years. My favorite neighborhood. I'm in Northeast now in Brooklyn. Love it. Okay, so I moved to DC. I didn't really know if I wanted to do service delivery or policy work. I just knew I wanted to be in an international space because what the stint overseas taught me is that I have fierce freaking wanderlust. And like I can't hold down a job unless the job lets me travel. So it was clear that I needed to be in an international space. So I started, this was when the job market was actually reasonably good. So I applied to a whole bunch of jobs and I figured something will come along. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I landed a job at an HIV prevention advocacy organization. And I was like, I don't know if I'm good at advocacy, but turned out I was really good at it. I learned a lot. And then I stayed in NGO advocacy for 15 years, and I worked on a whole bunch of different topics, gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health rights, HIV prevention, whole bunch of stuff, basic education, all in the international development sphere. And then I moved into safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH. And I moved into that because I had spent a lot of time in rural health clinics all over the world watching women carry water to their deliveries to give birth because there was no water in the health facility, or driving around roads that were nearly impassable watching young girls carrying jerry cans of water on their heads during school hours, so clearly they weren't in school. And so it became really clear to me that it was a very fundamental women's rights issue, and I wanted to learn more about it. And I've been in the water and sanitation space ever since, so I've been working on this issue for more than a decade. There's a picture of me down there in a poop suit. It has little flies coming off of it. And so I got to do the NGO side of things, kind of campaigning, advocacy, doing silly stunts to get politicians to notice. But I also got the opportunity to write and negotiate what's called the Senator Paul Simon Water for the World Act. It passed Congress unanimously in 2014, and it defines priorities for how the United States does water and sanitation foreign assistance. So that was probably the coolest accomplishment I'll ever have in my life, and it's behind me, but it still makes a difference. And then I got poached by as Sarah likes to call the artist formerly known as USAID. And I got to do other really cool stuff like represent the United States at the UN General Assembly. My job there was primarily, well, I'll talk about it a little on the next slide, but primarily to oversee implementation of that law that I wrote and got passed. And so USAID was run through the wood chipper, and 14,000 of us were terminated summarily without benefits or pension effective September 1st of last year. And so I've gone out on my own, and now I get to choose who I work with. And so here I am, back full circle on campus. So at USAID, I did kind of 3 buckets of things. So I said I oversaw implementation of the law, so that looked like making sure that all of the different components of the law were being met, but it also looked like making sure that what we were doing at USAID was compliant with what Congress envisioned for us to be doing, which was what we called a pro-poor mandate, so really focusing on the places where the need for safe drinking water and sanitation were the highest, and where under 5 mortality from diarrheal disease was the highest. So there was a lot of interagency stuff working with the State Department. I was telling Erin I got to work with NASA a lot on groundwater surveillance satellites, and they would send me really cool imagery from the Hubble telescope or whatever. So lots of collaboration there. The second bucket was kind of more diplomatic. So I supported development of US policy as it related to water. So it might have been a climate change policy where there was a water component, or it might have been a gender equality policy where there was a water component. And then I represented that in what's called intergovernmental fora, which is an official, it's like a UN, like the UN, or anything where the membership is states and not also civil society, or also academia, or also it's like very formal global processes. So for example, I got to negotiate a WASH document that the G20 was developing under Brazil's presidency 2 years ago. So I like got to sit in the room with all the other G20 governments and like negotiate what the words should say. And then lastly, I was, yeah.
Wrote a ton of talking point speeches in cables. Say more about writing a cable.
Okay, so a cable, is anyone familiar? DMV native doesn't get to answer because you might be a State Department brat. Yeah, yeah. Cheater. Anybody else know what a cable is in diplomatic speak?
Yeah, well, just from the diplomat, like,
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
There's some things that show actually got right. There's a lot it didn't. Cables are a real thing. So a cable is like a communication from one diplomatic hub to another. So it might be instructions from the Secretary of State out to every ambassador in the world, or it might be the ones that I was writing were like, there's this really important meeting of water ministers happening in your country. We request that the ambassador get involved to work with the water minister of the country to make it a success. Or there's going to be a convening in another country where we'll be talking about how to finance water infrastructure. Please encourage the finance minister of the country you're posted in to attend. Or it might be communicating a new policy. So FYI, Washington supports this thing that the G20 is doing right now. So your actions moving forward should be in line with it, things like that. And then talking points and speeches, like in the government, there's a really, really, really huge sets of layers of people, and no matter how long you've been there, it's almost guaranteed that there's a bunch of people above you that get the first shot at speaking in public, and so they have no idea what the issue really is because they basically just go around speaking in public all the time, and so you have to prepare them so that they don't sound like idiots when they are in public talking about the thing that's actually my job. So I did a lot of that, a lot of like, we kind of joked it was like policy making via talking point, where like somebody would invite the big boss to come and speak on, I don't know, evaporation and in soil quality. And we're like, well, we don't actually have a policy on evaporation and soil quality. So like, I'm gonna write this person's speech. And I think I just set new policy in what she said, because that didn't already exist. So there was a lot of that. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry, might be super boring for people who are not into policy, but the third bucket of what I did was the technical stuff. So I was our gender and inclusive development advisor because I had a really strong technical background on rights-based analysis, barriers analysis, gender-based violence, things like universal construction, so making sure that the latrine or the borehole or the hand washing station is accessible for people not just with physical disabilities, but intellectual, auditory, visual, et cetera. And so what that looks like was a lot of technical support. We had a $400 million annual program budget. We were providing water and sanitation services, system strengthening technical support and construction in about 40 countries. And so I would go through and say, you're not gonna reach the women that way. Let me help you figure out how to reach the women. Or, oh, you need the construction standards for a latrine, here they are, that kind of thing. A lot of times I would do the gender analysis for them before they did their design, or do an inclusive development analysis for them and say, well, have you noticed that the indigenous people or the ethnic minorities have a 6-point less likely access to hand washing? You might want to focus on them.
Question?
Yeah.
So for that kind of work, how much of it is just taking standard practice, best practice, common sense, and just...
A lot of it.
And how much of it is kind of more customized to location or culture?
So there's a standard set of tools But water and sanitation are extremely localized, whether it's the source of water, the customs around it, menstrual hygiene practices and expectations around what a latrine looks like, whether it's a conflict or post-conflict country generally has a significant impact on the prevalence of gender-based violence. And so people might be particularly concerned about how far away from home their water point is, because it's very risky to go walking for water. And if you've already been raped as a weapon of war, you don't want to go outside the safety of your family compound, right? So those are the types of things that start to make it extremely customized for the setting. And a lot of our programs worked in multiple districts across a country. And so, yeah, it was a deep dive working with our local staff that really understood those contexts. Climate variability is another thing that's hyperlocal. And then the source of water. Is it deep aquifer? Is it surface water purification? Is it gravity fed? There's a lot of those types of things that also come into play with where can you put a borehole and does it feel too far away? Is it on a path that's safe so that people don't fall and hurt themselves? Is it, that type of thing? So it does become, you kind of look at your standard toolbox and figure out, like, you really need that tool in this situation, but you should probably ask the local disabled persons organization for help, because I'm not an expert in Braille in the local language. Is anybody else, or do we skip Braille? Things like that. Okay, so we went through trauma, and now of those programs in 40 countries, it was like, depending on how you count, maybe like 80 to 100-ish. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, yeah. Monitoring and evaluation. So that's things like indicator selection, enumerator selection, analysis methodology, but it's also picking the right mix of qualitative versus quantitative. It's a trap to think that we dug 3 boreholes in a catchment area of 5,000 people equals 5,000 people with access to water. So what else do you add to the mix to ask whether you actually got them access to water or just dug a borehole? And then as a federal government agency, we also had a lot of oversight from Congress. So a lot of the program monitoring data had to get rolled up into reports to Congress to prove that we were spending our money effectively. Don't believe anybody that will currently tell you that we were running wild with our money. The amount of pages that we wrote reporting back to Congress would probably break the roof off this building. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And it's one of the things that I think is really cool about the work that Sarah does, because like I said, the standard is we dropped a borehole in a catchment area of 5,000, therefore 5,000 people. But that doesn't tell us anything about the lives of those 5,000 people. We tend to want, because WASH's water and sanitation is such an engineering heavy sector, historically the indicators that have been used have been extremely quantitative and extremely focused on numerical targets. And so we're, I think, frankly, as a sector, quite behind on the human rights side of things and whether what we're doing is actually changing anyone's life. So my job was to help figure out those more subtle metrics, indicators, survey instruments, things like that. Okay, so USAID, you might have heard, mostly gone. Most of our programs gone on the water and sanitation side. We think there's I'm talking way too long in the early slides, Sarah, so keep me going. We think, based on currently available data, aka leaked spreadsheets and private conversations with people who are still inside the government, that about 10 programs remain out of about 80-ish, 90. It just really depends how you count them, but And they're working in about 7 countries, depending on how you count them. 4 of them are providing service delivery at the community level, by which I mean they're dropping boreholes, they're repairing boreholes, they're digging latrines, they're installing hand washing stations, they're helping communities operate and maintain those services, or working with water utilities to operate and maintain those services. There's 2, maybe 3, I'll explain why, very large infrastructure projects. Very large, and they actually do not meet the legal criteria of how the money is supposed to be spent, because they're in upper middle income countries, Jordan. But they are very, very important projects, because Jordan is one of the most water scarce countries in the world. So one is a very large conveyance pipeline that will provide water to all of Oman, and then the other is a very large wastewater treatment plant. The 3 there is because state told Congress that they were going to spend $30 million on a water project in Egypt, but we didn't have a $30 million water project in Egypt, so I don't know what that's about. And since state fired all of us, they don't have anybody capable of designing a $30 million water project in Egypt, so watch this space. 2 of the remaining programs are technical assistance, by which I mean no construction, super efficient, super affordable. It's mostly transfer of knowledge, right? It would be like if you looked at each other's research proposals and gave feedback. That sort of activity, primarily working with water utilities and local governments to help them solve their own problems. And then my personal favorite, they are still funding a contractor to maintain a website which no longer exists. The URL got purchased by Casino Cash App in violation of DHS regulations, and yet the contractor is still being paid to maintain it. That's a mystery. Yeah. In the context of USAID closing and a 2025 reduction of about like $35 billion in official development assistance as a result.
You said 35 billion?
Yeah, USAID's total budget was about 40 billion, but there are still programs online. Mostly they're HIV programs. So I'm like back of the envelope math that's probably like $5 billion has continued since January of 2025. Everything might be different this year, we'll see. In that context of a rapid cancellation of all of these programs, with people being told they had to return money or face lawsuits from the federal government, with no warning and no ability to prepare, and no ability to find somebody to take it over or, cover the deep aquifer well that had been dug so that small children don't fall in it and die. In the same context, a number of the leading European donor governments to water have also scaled back. So we've seen significant cuts to water and sanitation sector investments from Germany, France, Sweden, the UK, all in the same context. And while the absolute dollar amount that the United States was giving was the second largest after Japan, the proportional amount of foreign aid going to water and sanitation was actually significantly higher in Germany, for example, in the UK. So them also cutting their water and sanitation foreign aid budgets at the same time that USAID was yanked offline is creating a very challenging global environment. And on top of it, USG stopped paying its UN dues and withdrew from a number of UN agencies and stopped paying voluntary contributions to a number of UN agencies that do water and sanitation work. And the Gates Foundation, which was hands down for many, many, many years the largest private funder of water and sanitation services in developing countries, cut their program last year. really we're seeing a massive threat to the ability to continue providing these services in the poorest countries where there's no tax base and there's no infrastructure that can reach the most remote areas. There are 3 what we call emerging donors, so like not the ones that we're used to seeing playing in the foreign aid space. Spain, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi in the past like 3 years have launched water funds of their own focused on official development assistance for water. Collectively, they total probably, I don't know, like $100 billion, something like that. None of them have plans for how they're going to spend it. So it's a complete free-for-all, and there's no strategy behind it yet. We're hoping that they will develop it. And against all of this, less than 20% of low and middle income countries have enough money to reach their national targets for water and sanitation access and broader water security. So the estimate is that $1 trillion US is required a year to reach universal access to drinking water, sanitation, and basic hygiene, and water security by 2030. 2025 setbacks in terms of financing just put us hundreds of, like, billions of dollars further behind that $1 trillion target. There's also a global, 5 minutes, cool. Human resources crisis. The UN has cut 30% of its staff as a result of the US not paying dues. The estimates are nearly 260,000 people worldwide have lost jobs because of USAID's closure, and this includes like subsidized technicians at water utilities in rural Zambia. I mean, I'm making up a location, but like this is not just people like me who, you know, are highly educated and could switch fields and move back to Chicago if I wanted to and do something completely different. These are like people that are absolutely essential to that water pipe working in a health clinic in rural, pick your very, very poor country. So that's another problem that has plagued us for a long time that has now gotten significantly worse in the current context. So data that was released last week in Dakar, Sarah, confirms that fewer than a third of low and middle income countries around the world have enough human resources to provide all of these services and make sure that they keep working. So there's a lot of people that just lost their jobs, but there's not any money to hire the right people into the jobs that are needed in order to actually reach the people who need the support. And then lastly, politics. Huge problems with politics, and we don't need to go into this as much unless people are really interested in it. But I think the 2 things that I would flag are the last 2 points here. There's a think tank called the Pacific Institute. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but they have what's called a water conflict chronology, where they have been tracking violence related to water and attacks on water since like 1990. And in the past 3 years, those violent incidents related to water have increased exponentially year on year. So we're looking at like 400 incidents of violence related to water a year. And that can look like a terrorist attack on a water point. That can look like fighting between a pastoralist and a nomad over who gets to use water because the government didn't plan well enough to make sure everybody gets some. It can look like terrorist recruitment, which we're seeing increasingly. So that's something like eyes on that space because it's concerning. And then against this backdrop, who knows what the SDGs are? Is this familiar to most people? The Sustainable Development Goals, cool. You might know they are supposed to expire in 4 years, and the world is extremely fractured right now. Are we gonna talk about that, or are we just gonna pretend it's not happening? And which is worse for the poorest of the poor in the world, given a context where nobody can agree on anything right now. And then just a reminder of how many people in the world are still living without safe drinking water, without a toilet, without the ability to wash their hands, and without the confidence that they have enough water of the right quality and quantity in the right location for everything that they might need it for. So I'm gonna skip that, and obviously South Park is my jam these days. So that's all. Sorry, that's a lot. There's a lot. Welcome to my whole 15 years of my life.
I think we will take questions, but I mean, I was very interested in what was next, because so far it's like, you want to put your slide up? Or
I can.
Is it more
This,
doom and gloom?
no. So for years and years and years, people have been saying, white people in the international development space have been saying, oh, we got to give the local governments and the local communities the lead. Like, it's never going to work if we don't put them in the lead. But then they go, it's really expensive to do that. You have to go to communities and talk to people. And it's slow to do that because you have to go to communities and talk to people, and Congress wants to hear what we've done. Well, right now there's no choice but to do that anymore, which is kind of cool. And you actually are seeing a lot of leaders in sub-Saharan Africa saying, well, it's about damn time we had our own solutions all along and you people wouldn't slow down enough to listen to us. So, so there's some really interesting opportunities there to challenge assumptions and donor governments to sit the F down for a minute and listen up. The other thing is we gotta get really creative, right? Private sector's still in, but they're a little afraid, depending on what country they're in, of potential dictator retaliation. But the other thing is we worked in silos for a really long time. Food and water can smile and nod at each other, but different pots of money, different technical approaches, different degrees, different line ministries, different whatever. Well, that's stupid, because you can't grow food without water, right? So how do we do that differently? Or, we talked a great game around climate change adaptation and water, but climate finance doesn't fund water. It's not in scope for most of the climate funds. Well, that's stupid. How do we change that? So we really need to be thinking much more differently. And for me, that's about taking a human rights-based approach, because a rights-based approach lets you go to whatever the root causes of the problem, and it doesn't pass judgment on what that root cause is. And then it tells you what you're solving for. And I think that is really an important way for people to get out of their own way and actually work together, that food and water actually need to be joined up in a lot of ways. Let's figure out how to do that. The last, the next bucket, I just want to make it very clear, USAID still exists legally. And Congress so far has shown absolutely zero interest in eliminating USAID legally, except for one guy, but he's overruled. He tried to write some legislation that didn't go anywhere. So for those who have representation in Congress and are inclined to make your voices heard, it's actually really, really important to make it really, really clear to Congress that constituents think USAID should exist. Will it ever look like it did before as an independent agency? I don't think so. But can it be brought back where it's the premier technical support agency in the world, which is what it was, and where it's actually a lot of money that's really doing measurable good and reporting to people? It can. And just today, folks may have seen that the government reopened. That appropriations bill that is headed to the president's desk provides $30 billion in foreign assistance dollars. B. It's a $20 billion cut from our prior budget, which I think is actually quite appropriate considering that they fired all the people who have the expertise. So they can't possibly implement the same amount without bringing more staff back on. But I do think it's very important for people to know that this is not a popular thing in Congress, even among a lot of Republicans, and USAID still exists. So for those who are interested in the global side of things, the press would lead you to believe that it's all over, but it's actually not. So I think that's just key. And then, like I said, post 2030, like, do we or don't we? Because there's huge risks either way. Maybe we just let it slide the way it is. Sarah, I don't know if that was worth going back for.
That was absolutely worth going back. No, we appreciate it. And I will